All right. We are, especially those of us in North America who understand things like the Great Plains and rolling ancient seabeds and all the rest of it, we're going to have quite and watery things. We're going to have a wonderful chat with two Canadians. Can I say that's clearly that there are no hyphens or anything? Two Canadians. Uh, the Canadian composer Karen Sunabacka and pianist Darryl Friesen. We're going to talk about your 2022 first CD, huh?
Yep.
I love that, Daryl.
Yes, our first
Um,
CD.
your first CD, 2022 Ravello release, Curly Q. Now that's what got me right away. The solo piano works of Karen Sunabacka. Okay, but Curly Q, I thought, what kind of crazy silliness is that? That's what
Mhm.
got me attracted to to getting in touch with it. Hang on, gotta fix this. Um, what if it's all piano music of Karen Sunabacka, played brilliantly, I can say right this minute, by Darryl Friesen. I mean, as I mentioned off camera, something about execution that is tight and solid and clean and clear gives me goosebumps. Okay,
Well,
here's
thank you.
the span of years, because I'm always really fascinated by that. Let me just make sure is roughly from in terms of compositional life is roughly from about 2008. I'm thinking of Falling in the Water
Mhm.
to 2020, Spider Solitaire. Have I got that pretty close? Yeah, I think
You
so.
know, even farther. So my
Hmm.
first
Oh,
piece, so
oh,
Lost, was written in.
1999, Hiding.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah,
And you even admit it was your first piece on the program.
yeah.
No, I found that
I know, is that
interesting.
scary? It's my very first piece I ever wrote in a composition,
It's wonderful.
like when I was studying composition. Yeah.
It's absolutely wonderful. Why it's called hiding, we'll go into. So what we
Yeah.
talked about before we pushed record is this is a CD of piano music, all music by Karen Sunabacka, but with very, very specific narrative content. And let me read the titles for you. Curly Q, we'll figure that one out in due course, 2009. Hiding from 1999. And then this one that blew my brains out, and you will have to explain it, Karen. Our inner lives were entwined, embroidered with the same pattern from 2021. And I looked at that and I thought, what are you talking about? How am I going to possibly hear that? And then you do explain it, and we'll discuss it in a bit. Falling in the Water, 2008, a canoe on a lake that goes zip and is done. The imagery just poof. Um, Falling Water, what is this thing? Lost, which we'll have a look at from 1997, and then Spider Solitaire, which from 2020, which actually tells a lot to me as I speak, which is that it's the plague. Everybody's home, bored out of their minds, and unfortunately, from my point of view, because I have no interest in card games, Karen Sunabacka apparently loves to play solitaire, something crazy like that, and Spider Solitaire is her musical narrative about playing solitaire. That all by itself is very nearly oxymoronic. But we'll talk. Okay. Now, let's
Yeah.
explain who you guys are. What's with this earphone? Hang on. Let me just pull my wires around here. Okay. Um, let's talk about Karen for just a sec so everybody out there kind of knows what's going on. Karen, you find inspiration from puzzles, stories, and your Métis mixed European heritage, and I want to talk about that in just a second. But that already scared me. Inspiration from puzzles. I hate puzzles. Uh, 4,000 pieces. Who's going to spend a lifetime figuring that out? And by the way, that's composition,
Mhm.
isn't it? I mean, this is why I'm not a composer. Okay. Um, let's see what else is known. This is you have deep roots in the Red River settlement, what is now known as Manitoba, and I am so fascinated by Native American uh,
Mhm.
history and the way it has been completely obscured uh, and now being rediscovered. And I wonder a little bit. Maybe we'll have time to talk about how how aware Canadians are of their native peoples. Probably a whole lot more than Americans. That I am guessing with a certain confidence. This mix of cultural connections sometimes creates conflicts and new perspectives. This is what I hear on this CD, as a matter of fact. Your music, Karen, reflects this cultural mix, which we'll talk about through the exploration of sounds. This is all from the program notes. I didn't think this up 20 minutes ago. And stories of the Canadian prairies, which we've already talked about. Very interesting what's going on up there with the Canadian prairies since about the Pleistocene. Karen is Associate Professor of Music at Conrad Grebel University College. Have I got that?
Yep.
Did I do
Conrad Grebel, yep.
Grebel? Okay, I just do a Grebel as opposed to Grebel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
University College at the University of Waterloo, and we have talked earlier. My Edwin Outwater is a friend of mine from years and years ago, and he conducted that Waterloo, whatever the other name is, the other city there, symphony from
Kitchener. Kitchener Waterloo Symphony.
Kitchener Waterloo, yeah.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Darryl lives in a very civilized place. Where are you? Toronto?
No, I'm in Winnipeg.
Winnipeg. Sorry. Oh, we had a wonderful show of Godspell in Winnipeg one night. Then we went broke in Bozeman. That's another story we'll talk later. But so I have these vague memories from my youth of Winnipeg, September, freezing cold, winds, horrible. So forgive me. I'm a Yankee. What can I say? Now let's talk about Darryl a little bit. Praised for his rich palette of tonal color. That is for sure. This CD is, I don't know how. What I'm trying to say is how you do it, because again we're talking about an extremely esoteric combination of notes, if I may say so, and the colors that you have no doubt spent hours exploring and chatting with Karen about to figure out and make work. I'm interested in. Okay, doctoral studies made possible through generous grants, etc., Canadian Council, and so on. You have your Bachelor of Music and Master of Music degrees in piano performance, University of Manitoba. You completed your DMA at University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. How could you possibly have lived in America for such a period of time and survived? Sorry, how many Americans are going to see this? I'm kidding, folks. Everybody out there, I hope. Anyway, really, really, really interesting. So we have a composer and pianist. How long have you guys known each other? When did that start? Who wants to go first? Darryl was not. Darryl was just had his mouth open. He was so ready. Go.
Yeah. Well, we first probably knew of each other maybe in university. We were both undergrads at approximately the same time. I was a few years ahead of Darryl, so he probably remembers me more because I was in my trying to find grad school mode. I think by the time he was there. I think that was in my last year, and you were in your second or third year.
Something like that. Yeah.
But what, you played together a little bit, did a recital here and there, or what, or how?
Oh, not then.
Not then. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We just were in.
Yeah, that would have been right around 99 or 2000, somewhere around we've known each other, or known of each other.
Okay, and then when did somebody say, "Hey, what do you say? You want to play all my piano music?"
Yeah, that's right. Well, so then we were both working at a small little college in southern Manitoba. So there's a piano prof who had been there for a number of years, and she retired. And so my colleague actually, I guess, found Darryl, and Darryl, you were newly back from grad school. Perfect. And looking for things to do. And so Darryl started. So I remember I walked in and I was like, I introduced myself, and he's like, "Oh, we know each other already, Karen." And I was like, "Oh." And then I was like, "Oh yeah, okay." Now, but I was just I was only in my second or third year at the university myself. So it was a small little college.
Nice. Sounds nice. Sounds really nice.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was that, and that was how, and then we worked together so much, and we were in the same carpool, so you get to know each other pretty intensely, and then we started performing together.
Right, I was going to say we were in a trio together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, at what point, Karen, did you say I'm going to put together a CD of my piano music? And let's start there.
So my first sabbatical from there, and I'm just trying to think when that was. That was around 2014. Right, Darryl? Or around there, 14, 15? I'm trying to remember when I went to sabbatical. And we were talking about it before that, but I thought, okay, on my sabbatical, I will work on it. And then, because I had to write another piece or two, so that's why I was thinking,
I get it.
It must have been around then. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that leads me to the question, because I was going to ask, well, was there a process? You know, you throw the music out on the table and you decide what's going to fit where and how, because the years of composition are, you know, splayed around a bit. So there's method to the madness, I'm sure. But first of all, is this it? Is this all the piano music so far? Yeah.
So far, yes, solo piano music. This is everything. And actually, it's funny because we were working on the CD, and I had been commissioned to write another one, and so we had to scramble and throw it on after at the very end.
You don't mean solitaire, do you?
No, our inner lives were entwined. That one, because that's 2021.
Interesting.
So we had already gotten the grants, I think, before that piece was written. So.
Well, and at first we actually thought that the person who premiered it, Naomi, might want to come and perform it on the CD. Yeah. But then when she found out I was performing everything else, she was really generous. She said, "Oh yeah, absolutely, just include it on the CD. It should be on there." And that was great. It was very generous and kind of her.
Nice. Very, very nice.
I learned it pronto.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, thank you for leading me through my interview so beautifully. Just how tough is this music, Darryl?
Well, it's challenging, but I mean, I remember in another kind of public interview, the one we did at the art gallery, Karen, I've always thought that Karen's music is incredibly coherent, even when it's really challenging, both to the eye in terms of when you're learning it, and also the ear if you're internalizing all the sonorities. It's like you've already said, Daniel, it's really narrative. And so I've always found that it's really easy to understand, even when it's challenging to learn. I hope that that's succinct.
Let me jump in for just a second. It is very understandable to me, because that's what has me so pleasantly mystified by the music. There are big fogs for me. You know, as a first-time listener, there are fogs where I'm saying, what, how, where, why? And then there are amazing moments that I clearly understand in terms of the direction, the substance, even the use of what to me I guess I've heard the CD a couple times now today. Something about there are these little tiny moments of gorgeous tonality that just I hope this isn't too stupid a statement, but that are quite deliberately there, and they just kind of gave me a nice little on the back of my neck. You know, they just helped me. And I love contemporary music, so it's not like I was having trouble with contemporary music. It's just that I kept thinking, ooh, that is so clever, the way she will come to a moment of some kind of gorgeous little tonal rest and then move off in other directions. Did that make any sense, Darryl, to you as a fan?
Oh, for sure. And I certainly, Karen, I don't want to speak for you, but I know that for both Karen and I, one of our favorite moments on the album is when you move into the third section of Curlicue, when you come from a really fairly aggressive opening, and then you go through all this quite Debussyan impressionistic middle, and then it just melts into this glorious C major section. It's very chorale-like. Yeah, and I mean, Karen, I think for both of us, that's one of the most special moments on the album. We just both, I love it so much.
Oh, guess what? We're moving into the piece-by-piece descriptions now. Thank you very much, both of you. This is a great interview so far. Let's just stay there for a minute. The first piece on the CD is Curlicue from 2009. And here's what I do is I take stream of consciousness notes while I'm listening, you know, and then there they are, and then I try and figure out how to write the review about it later. But it's for example, the opening of Curlicue is, for me anyway, in that moment was this kind of wonderful frothing from the get-go. It's evocative and colorful, in a swirling sort of way, and that's I keep seeing that diagram on the back of the CD that looks so astrological somehow, quite deliberately, I'm sure. Let's see, and here about Darryl's playing. It's bright, as I've said, tight. There are moments of sweet tonality commingled with wide-ranging tonal travels and pauses. So the narrative is extensive and complex. It's not just how are you? I am fine. I'm in Manitoba. I'm in Toronto or Winnipeg. Sorry, it's really something. Lots of little fragments, sometimes almost satirically disarming. I wanted to bring that up because I wasn't sure whether you were playing with my mind a little bit in a gently satirical way. Am I anywhere close?
No, that's very true. My mom always says that I'm very playful in my music. Excellent. And that's true. Like it's a little bit playful and maybe a little bit off kilter, which she says comes from my Métis heritage. That even the jigging and the dancing, it's not quite square. It's a little bit. There's a little bit of a nudge and a wink and a.
Oh, that is so helpful. That really has helped me because that's what I heard on the CD. Just this little bit of playfulness, as you have said. Yeah. Let's talk about Métis a little bit. This tradition, Métis. This, am I close, sir? Anyway.
Yeah.
Let's give me that story of your family and that part of your family and your heritage and all of that, and then how your mom pictures in this CD a lot, and I just want to give us that story, would you?
Yeah, so the Métis people are a post-colonial contact, or post-contact people. Is kind of what I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, post-contact. So and they're really centered on the prairies. The Red River settlement in particular. So in the it's a long story, but in the early 1800s really is when they really became a people, and they were a people that mixed both indigenous culture with settler culture, and so the indigenous
that's so Canadian people, somehow. Whereas in America they would just shoot you dead.
Yeah, well, there's a bit of that too, but yeah. So it's unique because they weren't fully accepted by the First Nations people or the Native people, you want to say, and they weren't fully accepted by the settlers. They were half breeds. So my ancestors were called half breeds, but mostly, mostly it was First Nations or Native women marrying people who worked for the Hudson's Bay Company, who were white settlers. And I mean, it's very complex and complicated, but the ones who stayed were the ones who loved their wives and kind of stayed. I mean, it's more complicated than that, but some it's because some people would come and have wives here and then go back and get their wives from England, right, or something like that. So
the convenience of wives, if you will, especially if they're native peoples, just the whole racist business about the whole
exactly. But the Red River settlement at one point before the 1870s, so Manitoba joined Canada, joined Confederation in 1870, and that was because the Métis people at the time, who were a majority of the settlement, so there was I think around 12,000 people in the Red River settlement, which is what Winnipeg is now and beyond on the rivers.
Amazing, I love it.
There's 12,000 people there, and 10,000 were Métis, and there was English Métis and French Métis, and so that's just kind of the two companies. We had the Northwest Company, which was tended to be more French, and the Hudson's Bay Company, which was more English. And so anyway, and they worked together. They had their own system of governing and everything, and had all this land that they were living on and expected to be able to stay on the land. And of course, when Canada came in, they basically took the land from all the Métis. Most of us lost our land and either had to buy it back or, anyways, it's very complicated. But as usual, we were mostly the French Métis were much more. There was much more violence against the French because they were French Catholic. And indigenous.
Here we go. Wow, it's so complicated, and it's the history of Western Europe in Canada, if you will.
Yeah, in Canada. Yeah, and so the English were able to say, "Oh, we're English," and then just kind of pass as English, even though everyone kind of knew they were mixed. But so anyways, I'm simplifying it a lot. And there was Métis settlements from the early days all the way into Saskatchewan too. But the political stuff really happened first in Manitoba in 1870, and then in Saskatchewan in 1885. So those were the two big resistance.
By the way, thank you very much for that, because it's kind of like Mexican history and Canadian history. For Americans, it's like us. Who cares about anybody else? I'm sorry, forgive me, all of you who will be sending me terrible, terrible emails. But that is the truth of American racism and sexism. So part of me is still having a warm throb in my heart for all of you Canadians, because it seems like you have sorted things out slightly more civilizedly. I guess not. Darryl is about to faint.
There's a lot.
Well, like Karen said, she's simplifying it, and it's a complex and complicated and ongoing reality.
Yeah. So it's like us too, like our problem, but somehow it still seems a little more civilized up there. You understand I'm a Canadophile? I lived in Seattle and regularly visited Vancouver for the symphony concerts up there all the time. So I love the Canadian. They know how to have a salad. They know how to, they know what a real salad, a chicken salad is. They really know what that is. Okay, enough of history, but it's so important. Now, how about your mom? Because she's going to play. We're going to bring her up a little bit later with the other, one of the pieces. How influential was she, and how bitter or not was she? Was she what?
Well, so my mom is. I mean, we still are collaborating on a lot of things, and it's amazing what she does. But she's my parent who is bringing in my Métis heritage, right? So I really have four. If we look at my four grandparents, they're all different, right? So I have a Scottish, a Métis, a Finnish, and a Swedish. Yeah. So those are my four grandparents, and I feel like they're fairly pure. I mean, except for the Métis, which is mixed for generations. So it's my mom who has that, and so she's a writer. She's very thoughtful about how she thinks about things, and is very gentle, actually, I would say, in a lot of ways. And it was her mom who was very angry, and I feel like I'm about being, about the racism against the Métis people, and who was very active with Indigenous
because her mom
organizations.
Her mom would have had much closer contact with the bad times. Your mom's mom would have had much closer contact
my grandmother.
with that.
Yeah, my grandmother.
With the disgrace of the late 19th century and so on.
Yeah, I mean, it was her parents that lost land. I mean, we lost land about 2 or 3 times. Once initially, and then through the Depression, and it was all illegal, essentially. So my grandmother was a bit closer to it. I mean, the funny thing is as I'm getting to know this that my grandmother knew, I'm getting more angry, and my mom really didn't like her mom's anger. So she kind of, she's a bit more. It's really interesting. Yeah. So.
Well, and that does sort of what am I saying? Kind of influence all of your writing. Your own family history, let alone your national history, if you will.
And I did spend a lot of time at the Métis farm. It was the place where I probably felt the most at home. So I was fiddling with there's a lot of music, a lot of dancing, and a lot of hard work, right, on that farm. And so I spent a lot of time there. So it is highly influential.
And what do you mean by that? Is it a family farm, or is it a reservation farm, if you will?
No, it was the Métis in Manitoba at least didn't get a reserve, didn't end up on reserves. In Alberta there is some, but in Manitoba we just had farms. We had communities. So the community that my mom grew up in was a Métis community, and no one really understood that that's what it was. But it functioned really as a Métis community. They supported each other. They even supported the non-Métis people. It was a really really good community because of my great grandfather. Essentially, he was really a leader. Whereas but then the kids didn't go to residential school because he made sure there was a school in the community that they could go to. So there's all these, I don't know if you know the term, if you talk about residential schools in America, but they're pretty horrible. There are pretty horrible things in Canada, and we're coming to terms with that right now.
I've been reading about the coming to grips with that, and the U.S. did the exact same thing. We must change them. We must make them speak English and wear suits and ties, the whole thing. Yep. Now, this may seem superfluous to the CD, to many of my now highly offended American colleagues out there, but it's leading me to water.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Tell me about this water thing. I just listened to a CD by a camping girl. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Canoe rides and swimming and the rivers and the flowing, and I want to know what is that Métis also? If you get my kind of
I mean, I would say it is. I mean, the waterways were the highways of Canada, right? And so the English and the French came to the prairies where all the Indigenous groups were through the waterways. So water and being the Red River settlement, it's all right along the water. I've written a lot about my Métis grandmother, and she always talked about being born by the river, and so I have a piece called Born by the River. Nice. So water is important. And then, of course, I grew up just in Manitoba. There are so many little lakes close by. I mean, once you get out of the Red River Valley, which is really just a flat plain, you kind of come out of it, though, and you end up in the Canadian Shield, and there is incredible, I mean, lakes.
A lake
water,
district, if you will. I mean, almost kind of, but less mountainous, I presume.
I would.
Britain.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that, but the Canadian Shield is huge, but it's really gorgeous, and so I spent my time leading canoe trips and going on canoe trips and working at a summer camp. And so where, I mean, those were the summers, like the summers in Manitoba, and I guess kind of into northern Ontario, because that's where a lot of the cottages are and where the camps are. But that's that, and those were the routes that the voyageurs, or like the early Métis people, were taking to get the furs.
Makes perfect sense.
So it's kind of,
so that part of the history makes perfect sense, and what it speaks to me about, and then I promise we're going to move on to discussing the pieces specifically. But what I now find even more intriguing is that, and it has to do also with your narrative obscurantism. Somebody check me on that one. What I mean by that is that this history, even the waterways, the French and the English, and of course they interact with the native peoples because of the waterways and travel, and all of that, just tells me something that about what I heard here, that it is not just an idea of, well, let's see, let's write one about swimming, paddling a canoe. No, it's deep, 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 deep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Darryl, I love the way you are so accommodating. It's great. Okay, so we kind of touched on Curlicue, but I wonder if you want to tell me a little bit more. But let me see if I've got any other juicy bits in here. I'm talking still about the first piece, Curlicue, from 2009, and then we'll move on. The piece is fabulously engaging. I think that's part of what we've been talking about. There's something about the way you use tonality and not, that still the connectivity is there, human to human, if you will. It gets to me. So there's this the piece is fabulously engaging. I say, I have no idea why. I say to myself, stuff like that. She uses major tonality, the odd chord. I hear it almost like a memory chord slips in there every once in a while. That is absolutely magical. So congrats on Curlicue. I think that really came off well. Let's talk about Hiding from 1999, and you discuss, I'm so glad I'm a conductor and I don't have to go there. I was terrible at theory, but this whole idea of two sets of A, G sharp, C, and all these chords, and I'm going, no, I don't want to talk about that. And pitch class sets, that I found interesting. In other words, I'm not being too rude. I hope not. But that it's based on, but that is composition. What I found interesting about your notes is that you do sort of set. Like solitaire, you set an idea, you come upon an idea, and then you decide, as you mentioned in the notes, I'm going to figure out how I'm going to musically play a game of solitaire. And it worked. Okay, so Hiding.
Yeah.
Give me a little something about it.
Yeah, Hiding really was, it was a piece that my professor said I had to write using pitch class sets. So, it was as simple as that. Yeah. Yeah, and we had a visiting pianist. I don't even remember who it was. And so we had to do some kind of a draft for them. And so I came up with, I just totally like me to use pitch class sets and say, hey, why don't I try to do kind of a weird waltz in the middle of it? So
thank you for that, because I think I mentioned here somewhere there's some kind of weird waltz in here. I think somewhere. Main tune is almost a dance tune, a slow dance. Then it becomes more pointillist. Yeah. And Darryl is the master of pointillistic pianism. Yeah. How's that for nearly an alliteration? It's really interesting. Then back to an almost waltz. Magical swipes of the piano strings, all that, all those wonderful devices, makes for mystical, magical effects.
Yeah, and it's really the first piece that I was experimenting with the inside of the piano, and I have been doing that ever since. Yeah. But I loved what it sounded like. And then I loved, I was really trying to take those pitch class sets and transform them in as many ways as I could. So, at first you just pitch them, and then you strum them, and then you turn them into a waltz, right? And then you do this crazy rhythm between them, right? So, it was really that kind of a experimentation. And then I guess for me, it's like, how do you turn that into a nice shape that works, right? So.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm glad you used the word shape, because that's maybe a big takeaway for me on listening to your music for the first time ever today. the shape. There's always shape. You know what I'm saying? There's structure and shape and form that is satisfying. As Darryl mentioned, you can understand this stuff. How hard was hiding to put together? I don't quite remember the effects and whatnot, the plump keys and all that. But does this one flow, or did you have to kind of think it through a bit? What the hell is she talking about? Hiding? What's that?
Well, I think, again, like you said, is when there's a clear structure, then automatically it's much more coherent. It's much easier to see how you're going to pull an audience through the performance. And if water is a running theme through a lot of Karen's works, extended
no pun intended. Go ahead.
Which I love so much that she just said that, because I feel like the pitch class sets are introduced so clearly that it makes what comes afterwards quite a bit easier to realize. And I think that it's really lush writing. I found that when I listened to it, it reminded me so much of Berg. And I've told Karen this before, that when we were studying the second Viennese school and pitch class sets in university, I remember being fascinated by the mathematical qualities of Schoenberg and Webern, and the pointillism of Webern especially. But I always loved the fact that Berg could somehow take these pitch class sets and produce these things that were almost neo-romantic and post-romantic. And I find that in the first section of Hiding, it's just so expressive. And yet there's a distance to it that I think is evocative of the title. And then I feel like when it moves into the weird waltz section, it's playful again, and there's a nearness and there's a proximity that's really, really quite effortless to communicate. And then when the pitch class sets come back at the end in really clear form, even like you said, Daniel, I feel like then it's a memory of what happened at the beginning. So it just ties together so well that as a performer, it's just all right there. It's there on the page, and it's a joy to realize.
In other words, I think we both agree you know what you're doing, Karen.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Should we move on to your mom's bit of writing?
Yeah, our inner lives.
Our inner lives were entwined, embroidered with the same pattern. Composed in 2021, we're right in the thick of the plague. Dare I even? I mean, any influences or whatnot? It's a quote, as you say, it's a quote from your mom, Joyce Closton's The Story, My Sister, Myself, and so on. Go ahead, and then I'll...
Yeah.
And this is another wonderful, excuse me, sorry to interrupt, but this is another wonderful one in the Bachian, if you will, tradition, naming the characters in this narrative with the appropriate notes. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, so this one really came in the middle of the pandemic. It was a hard piece to write because, I mean, I'm teaching online, everything was taking longer, everything's all over the place. And so I felt bad because she was premiering it in March, and I don't think I got it done until February, like it was in 2021. I was like, I hope you're still going to do it. But like, it was really hard for me to write. It just in the middle of the pandemic, and my creativity felt very stifled and things like that.
We'll go to that in a second. We'll go to that in a second, because some people say, oh, I was able to write 7 symphonies and compose, and I was a zombie for 2 years. And I'm just a critic, but I just stared out the window because everything shut down. Anyway, go ahead. Excuse me. Inner lives. This piece, inner lives were entwined, is very closely related. I want to catch people up on what you have just said, since I interrupt so often, to the mood and the ambiance, which is a terrible word for what that was, but of the plague. I just call it the plague. It was. Period.
Yeah.
So, excuse me again for interrupting. So there was the idea. How did you pull this particular little fragment of text from your mom's writing?
Well, so my mom and I are often working very closely, and so she often has me read what she's working on, which means that then I'm kind of in the middle of this world that she's creating, which is my family history. Yeah, it's my family history.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
I know, it's amazing. No, it's amazing. And so she was writing about her sister within a Métis community, because her sister had a disability from birth. So it was a birth injury essentially. And so her sister was I think, well, anyways, it doesn't matter exactly what it was, but she ended up having mental and physical disabilities for her whole life. And so my mom felt very close to her. And so through my aunt's struggles, she was put in an institution, taken away from the family for 30 years, and then somehow managed to, when they realized, when the governments and others realized that maybe this isn't such a great way to treat our most vulnerable people, she was then put in a group home near the farm, so near the family Métis farm, and she would come for visits all the time. But I remember when she ended up coming out of the institution. So all this to say, my mom, working on the Métis values and how this was kind of against some of the Métis values, but at the time, this is what all the doctors said they should do with this disabled child. So my mom's working through it, and at one point she talks about how when her sister comes out of the institution and actually ends up doing very well, and she really felt like it was because of her resilience and the supportive, in some ways, this understanding that they were similar, and that they were and that their inner life, this is where she gets to, our inner lives were entwined somehow. They understood each other, even though they had been, one had been in an institution, and my mom in fact worked at the institution to try to be closer to her sister at one point.
Oh, that's stunning. Absolutely stunning.
Yeah, so all these, so she writes, so she's basically it's actually turning into a book now that is got a publisher, I believe, but it hasn't come out yet. But it's a gorgeous story, and I really feel like the whole book and everything that is summed up in that phrase. Our inner lives were entwined, embroidered with the same pattern, that they were the same and they could support each other. And,
yep, I get it now.
Yeah.
Now that was just an instantaneous revelation. It's been kind of a mystery assemblage of words in a way.
Yeah.
I knew its source from what you have mentioned in the program notes and so on. Yeah. But now I get it about the two sisters.
Yeah. And then using the letters of their names, both their nicknames and their full names. So Beverly and Joyce, or Bevy and Joycey, were their nicknames. I use those letters, and then just have sometimes the melodies separate and supporting, and sometimes they completely get embroidered together, right? So they get moved together, and there's similarities, right? Like, so just how I figured out, because like J isn't a note name, so you figure out a system to put a note name to the J. So I had a few systems I tried until I found one that I liked, and I can't remember what I stumbled across, but some with sharp, some with not. But anyways, it's a game for me to try to find something that I like and then try to be consistent with it.
Okay, and this is perfect for me to open up the chat a little bit about the two of you and chatting about it back and forth, because this is quite a narrative, this particular piece. How did it get put together? How'd you come to agreement, or did Darryl just go off into a room and learn it? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, mostly Darryl learned it, and then I would comment a bit on it. Like, he'd send me videos at one point. So
right.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
that's right, because you're in
so far away.
One is in Winnipeg, and you are, where are you, Karen?
KW, Kitchener-Waterloo, which is close to Toronto. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, this is something in general that I should say, and it's true of this piece as well, that I've always found Karen's scores so intentional and so specific that I, not out of selfishness, but out of respect for the score, I like to actually take it and learn it kind of without influence, and just what I find there on the score, and then I like to bring it to Karen and say, is this accurate to your intentions? What do you feel at this section? How is this or isn't this working? And so that was definitely true of this one as well. I was, again, fascinated and loved the score. But I remember that one of the biggest things I had to work out with Karen, besides that the names are worked into motives into the piece, so there is a clarity there for sure. But for me, I just felt like isolation is such an incredibly important motive or theme of this piece. But I felt like, well, who is it though that's experiencing isolation? Is it Auntie Beverly in the institution, or is it your mom who's been separated from her sister? And I felt like there are so many layers to how you could interpret who's feeling agitation and isolation. And I thought, and it's so personal because it's Karen's family in the piece. So I thought this one I have to get right. So I think that in some ways, Karen, I was the most interested in getting your feedback on this one because of how personal it was in some ways. And obviously, all of the pieces are an outpouring of who you are and your heritage and your interests and the collision of European and Indigenous music. Like all of that is absolutely true. But there was something really I don't know if I would say sacred, but something very special about this one that I felt like this one I really need to get right. So I feel very blessed to have worked directly on it with you, maybe more than any of the other ones.
Aha.
Right. Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Anything, Karen, before I
But no,
go
it's
in?
very true. I mean, for me, working with a performer, and I think I don't know if performers get annoyed with me about this, but I love what the performer brings to the performance. So like I do feel a little bit like when I give someone my score, they need to interpret it how they interpret it. And if it's not exactly how I mean, I don't know if I have an exact way I want that, because I'm always so joyful when I hear it and I'm like, oh, that's great, because there's some of them in that as well as what I wrote. So it's kind of my notes, but they kind of bring it to life. So there's more of a life to it that I think, like I'm a cellist, and so when I perform my own thing, when I perform my own works, I feel like it's flatter because it's me and then me, right? Like that doesn't bring a two or three dimensional, working into it. But when I give it to other people to play, there's more that they can bring to it than I could by myself. Does that make sense? So I just have this joy of working with people.
It not only makes sense, but I think it's very intelligent of composers, and probably a whole lot of composers that I know have the same feeling, which is they do their thing, they have their own imaginary solutions to these problems, to these narratives that are all in their own world, in this case a very intimate and personal world. And I want to ask you a couple questions about some sections that I heard in here. And you have to kind of trust that there'll be input from people with whom you put this piece of art together, right? I mean, that's kind of collaboration, to use that word, possibly overused word. But that's so interesting, and I'm glad this turned out maybe to be the piece about which I asked that question, because what I have taken away from this part of the conversation is that probably, again, like most artists who are given new music, they disappear for them, learn it, get past the notes and the troubles, and then start to have ideas and go with that for a bit, and then go back and say how close. It's kind of like me as a critic, how close was I? I will ask people at the reception, what'd you think? Was I all wrong about that Patatique symphony, stuff like that? Anyway, but so that's really, really fascinating, and this is turning out to be the kind of interview I was hoping it would be, which is this discussion about extremely esoteric, let's be clear, repertoire, very esoteric because it's so personal and so intimate and has such a narrative, a personal narrative, and then how people will get together and work it out, and then of course how the audience responds as well. And so a couple of questions I wanted to ask, though, because there are some furious knockdown dragouts in here in this piece. There are some real So I presume, from what I read, these are, I'm kind of, I should listen to it 17 more times, but these are the two sisters in conflict when they do have their conflicts, or is it deeper than that?
Both in conflict, but also just like the I would say in some sense the violence that my aunt suffered within the family and institution.
That's what I meant about deeper. Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah,
about
so
thrashing out at the institutional. Injustices. Yeah, sorry for.
Institutional and even societal, right? Because that was what you were supposed to do in those days, like in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, and if somebody's having trouble, you just put them away somewhere and forget about them. I mean, we have believe it or not, we all have come a long way in the past 60, 70, 80 years.
Yeah.
So, okay. Ready? Shall we move on?
Sure.
Okay, I'm next. I'm just going down chronologically here, and we have already had the discussion that it doesn't matter how long the interview goes on, within certain parameters. But if I can get through Solitaire, I'll never let you live that one down. We can have an hour and 20-minute interview. Okay. The next piece is Falling in the Water for piano with electronics from 2008. Speaking of falling in the water, recorded with sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. This really works. I found, in other words, these are with recorded voices of these 6 teenage girls hanging out at one of your leader training camps or something that you were involved in. At the summer camp. I went to summer camp in my horrid pre-pubic youth. I hated every minute of it. But I do know that thing where the parents say, "Go camp, 2 weeks. We'll see you later. Bye bye." So anyway, Falling in the Water for piano with electronics from 2008 which is kind of interesting using these devices in 2008. I'm just saying that I don't hear them used a whole lot. This idea of obvious audio tapes and so on. The girls are chattering away. The piece focuses on our different experiences of water. Yep. I loved the canoe during a canoe trip. I loved the bit about and the watery sounds that you captured. Mm-hmm. While I listened to this on the second time, I thought I was trying to imagine her down, at the water's edge, her ear close to the babbling stream and the microphone and all that. But it's the most glorious running stream water sounds. Although it gave me nightmares from my youth. I've got to ask, and it's a dumb question because I should know, but those cymbal-like sounds, how'd you pull those off on the instrument? I was puzzled. Do you understand what I mean about they're kind of a cymbal-like sounds? That was the best, like finger cymbals or something. That sound had a ting.
You strum the strings after pressing the damper pedal with your fingernail rather than with the flesh of your finger.
So that gives it that metallic, if you will.
Yeah, it sounds cymbalum rather than like a string instrument like a harp or something like that. It has a very, very different sound. If I'm understanding what you're saying.
Yeah, no, you have. That's exactly described. Yeah. What was that missing sound? Because of course I'm always trying to track down where you were inside the guts of the instrument, and that one really threw me. Yeah. So I wondered. I was trying to imagine you with finger cymbals and then playing. Good. Let's see. The conversation amongst the girls about falling in the water. Lovely swipes of the piano strings and everything. I mean, the whole piece is full of magic and color, of course, pianistic color and all the special effects. I'm wet. Yeah. Wet is the repeating mantra as the girls giggle and chatter about it. It's charming. The mesmerizing water sounds I've mentioned, and then I'll let you guys give me your ideas of it. The girls like swimming. Remember, this is stream of consciousness, and the piano discreetly agrees. Mm-hmm. I have no idea what that meant, but something about the cohesion of your narratives, as Darryl mentioned, everything makes perfect sense. Yeah, yeah. The structures, the structure. It's a horrible word in this case to use, but all makes sense. And I just loved that, and the choice of these quotes make this piece really fun and tongue-in-cheek. Speaking of what you have already confessed to, being somewhat tongue-in-cheekish, perhaps. Let's see, the sound of falls and faster moving water, the pointillist piano stuff, the single line punctuations, nice slower meditative section for piano, splashing and diving sounds of presence. I mean, it's just a gem. So in live performance, how does it all work? I guess, you do the cue and somebody pushes the tape on and off you go, right?
And off you go.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, you want me to say, like the performer was Cheryl Pauls, who commissioned this piece. And I said, well, how do you want to do this? Because even at that time, we could have had a computer and I could have pressed cues, right, and done that. And she said, just put it on the tape so that we press. Actually, it was on a CD. So this person just presses play on the CD and the piano just plays with the CD. So it's to keep it as simple as possible so that, we won't have any major technology fails or anything. So nowadays we just plug in a computer and I press play on a sound file and then it goes. Yeah.
And so, Darryl, that does work. Yeah? You feel comfortable?
It's great.
Perfectly comfortable.
Totally comfortable. And the score is great. And like everything else Karen does, it's very clear. Yeah. So the electronic track is captured in very large part. It's not even just a skeleton of it. It's very, very largely captured directly in the score. So synchronization is pretty effortless, actually.
I love the water plunge shrieks. Yeah. It's the girls swimming and chatting, the sparse chords and pianistic patter.
Yeah.
I must quote myself someday.
In this one, it's just for sheer. I love watching audiences listening to this experience because it's so experiential, and especially if you can be in a good hall where you can deal with speaker placement, it can be very immersive actually. And there is something really, really magical about how, well, like you said, Daniel, how the piano discreetly agrees with the sound. It's so it's
clear. It's very clear,
immersive,
isn't it?
It's very.
What I mean is the instructions are very. I mean, the intent of the music of the writing is extremely clear. Yeah. I didn't mean to interrupt you again, but
it's
that just
hard for me not to perform it with just a big grin on my face the
Sure.
whole time, with real disservice to the piece. I could never do that, but it's a joy to play this one. So yeah, I love it.
And I'll give you the last quote, then we'll move on. Falling in the water, absolutely love it, but I got wet. End quote. In other words, the charming, what are they called when they're in that age group? Anyway, the charming teenage repartee and the memories that we all have of those times. Yeah. And so on. I joke a little bit, and my experience with summer camp was horrific. So, but still, I remember, the big lagoon and going hunting for turtles and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
And then, oddly enough, from 2010, the next piece up is called "A Canoe on a Lake." Mm-hmm. Excuse me, written for young pianists, and that's really interesting because it's so important, frankly. The piece is very short, 50 seconds or something, under a minute.
Yeah, 51 seconds.
And it's a charming palindrome, but I dare you to explain that to a 5-year-old. Oh, my darling, it's a palindrome, don't you know? Here's how it works. I'm thinking of Dalla Piccolo. I think there's a piano piece or a flute piece or something in college I had to learn in it. Anyway, A Canoe on a Lake from 2010, written for young people. It's just a simple tune. Cleverly put together. It's just a little gem of construction, if you will.
It's just, I keep wanting, Darryl keeps thinking, he keeps wanting me to do this, but to put it all in a row on a piece of paper and then connect the dots. Because if you connect all the dots of the note heads, it turns into a canoe on a lake. So I'd love to see if it actually worked.
Well, thanks for pointing that out, because that really was intriguing when I read that in the program notes. So as I say here, connecting the dots, if you will, on this piece, if you can, or set up an undergrad student or something to do that for you.
Yeah,
just a suggestion.
And maybe color it in.
That's right.
Okay. And then cannot be discovered as strange anymore. From 2009, Falling Water. Mm-hmm. Once again, water everywhere, and that may be Canada, frankly.
There's a lot of water, yep.
From 2009, it's based on water motives originally composed for Falling, from the first piece, Falling in the Water, if I got that. And I didn't, frankly, recognize them. Two things I couldn't quite put it together. Maybe the beginning couple, something, but I would need more time to put the structure together. But that's also a very clever piece of compositional stuff, yeah? Mm-hmm. You're sitting around, you're like, hey, Falling Water. I think let's go back and look at the other, and so on. It's wonderful. What do I need so the water motives can grow and evolve? This is really a water to my ears piece. So all these water images, lots of pianistic subtle color effects, once again, distant and close. Which I guess I'm trying to remember now, but there's something about the way the piece is written that's I hear again this kind of like ghost dynamics in little bits and pieces. Am I? Come on, you're looking at me as if, no, it's not there. Are you out of your mind?
I'm trying to know what you mean by a ghost.
Yeah, what am I trying to mean? Something, lots of piano. Hang on, I'll get this. I'll get it. I can't remember, but a little hint of a tune, or several, maybe. Little hints of several little fragments, I don't know. All tentative in these beginning moments of the piece, and then it begins to get up some energy, some forward movement. Haunting moments of tonal tune fragments. Does that ring any bells?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't write any in, but it wouldn't be surprised.
Okay, so
if something like that came out, because it really is. I mean, I'm really taking the motives from Falling in the Water, so I feel like those kind of pop out to my ear.
And maybe in terms of dynamic, they might be a bit more distant or something. I don't know, but I found the whole thing fascinating, at least in my head. Things kind of slow on several occasions, flowing and eddying, it's definitely a watery vibe. I say to myself, but I can't figure out how to explain it. Well, that's obvious. Anyway, wonderful piece. How long is that one? I can't quite remember.
10 minutes.
It's 10 minutes, so it's a reasonably long piece of. I think there are 3 reasonably long pieces, anyway, on the CD. This one just goes by like a breeze. It just all makes so
Yeah.
much sense. Um,
Yeah.
Except I say to myself, I'm about watered out though.
Yeah.
Then there are some
Just
big
in time to be
crashes,
lost. Yeah.
random chords and some sort of water description. I mean, I get all
Yeah.
completely lost in the imagery, but it's wonderful. And again, I think if we take nothing else away, new piano repertoire that's important that my people have a look at. College faculty, they're always looking for new repertoire. The organization of each piece, you know what I mean? The structure, that we talked about that quite a lot. So there is sensibility, intellect, coyness, all the good stuff about, and the attraction to audience, to listeners, that that has to be sustained. Okay, so that's what I'm going to kind of pitch when I put the CD out to the college crowd.
Great.
Okay, let's look at the. All I have from Lost from 1997. That was your first piece, right? Are we talking about that?
That's my first piece. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
What I want to say is something about How Dare You, and apparently you're satisfied enough with it, yeah? Because it's incredibly daring. Your very first piece, 1997. That was 180 years ago, and you're still. Or was it like, I have 3 minutes. I've got to fill. What'll I do? Oh, okay, Lost. I wrote that back in my college. Or what? I mean, I'm being a little bit rude, but I don't mean to be.
I mean, it's funny. I hadn't heard it for years, right? Because it was premiered in my undergrad days, and one of the first pieces I had played, and I was all embarrassed, and like just because you just feel, it's your first thing that you put out in the world. But the pianist really liked it, actually, and I remember that. And and I was kind of going, "Oh, I'm sorry." I was feeling apologetic, which I'm trying to learn not to do, because
that's right.
My
mentor's biggest expression to me, and it helped me a lot during some bad times, was never apologize.
Yeah.
So I don't.
Yeah.
I'm a happy guy. Everybody else is angry, but it's okay. All right, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I was first learning about the piano. I'm not a pianist. I played the cello. I know a little bit. I can play a little bit of piano, but barely can I get through my theory classes to play piano. And right, so I'm then I'm teaching, right? So I just remember thinking that I was learning about the piano. I was learning that piano gets played often in the middle, and I was like, I got to use the extremes of the piano, which has been something that I do a lot in my music too, because like, why are all these notes up here and we're not using them, or down there? So part of me was doing that, I think, a little bit, and then I was really inspired by Bartok's piece, which was what is it, minor seconds, major sevenths, or something? Is that the title of the piece? So I thought, hey, I could try something like that. So that's what I did.
What you have just described is a charming explanation of your first college piece. In other words, it may be, here I might be in trouble, but it might be all head.
Right.
You know what I mean? All intellect.
Yeah.
In that sense. And here are my anti-intellectual questions for you about this piece. It's described as dark. Yeah. I call it in my stream of consciousness remarks, Big Ben, that that repeats throughout. It's quite lost. It makes me feel quite lost, frankly. I mean, it's sort of a depressing sort of thing. And what else do I say? And then there's that note trill from one end of the instrument to the other. Boom, boom. Explain, please.
Exactly. There's my extremes.
There you go.
Playing with the extremes of the piano.
It's so much fun to play because you get to use the entire instrument in the first couple bars.
Well,
it's just so great.
Karen, you're a success, clearly, on that piece. Well, that's really nice. But when I saw that, I thought, oh, are you crazy, lady? Are you crazy? Your very first piece from college? What? Why? That one should be hidden in a box somewhere, and it works out fine. I don't mean, and that was before I listened, so don't misunderstand me. It works out fine, which is an omen for the future, if I may say, from 1997.
Yeah.
Okay, now we've all talked off camera, but it's time to discuss Spider Solitaire from 2020. And you yourself, Karen, confess, I became obsessed with trying to depict in music the way the game slowly untangles disorder to order I don't understand that part right there. That's when I said, no, I hate card games, and that doesn't, in disordered order, why would you play a card game like that anyway? Let alone solitaire, where you're all by yourself. It's just so depressing to me. But this is talk about descriptive narrative. You describe in the notes this slapping sound that's putting those cards down right throughout the piece. It's very descriptive in that way. And let's see, for a depiction of 10 empty. Hang on. The first is a depiction. The first is a depiction of the 10 empty spaces through the use of trills. That's one of your quotes, I think. What
so
on earth does that mean?
It's the empty. So like, any there's tons of solitaire games, but before you deal the cards, there's so many spaces that you're going to put the cards into. Sometimes it's 8,
I see.
Sometimes it's 10, sometimes it's 4, right? Like it just depends on the game, and
like
there's
tarot.
all sorts of different ones.
Maybe.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. So so in this case, there's 8 empty spaces. No, 10 empty spaces. What did you?
Yeah. 10, I think.
10 empty. Yeah, 10 empty spaces. And so it's because the empty spaces are part of the game, right? Like you need to.
That's what they say.
The empty spaces. Yeah, the empty spaces are great because that's where you can then put more cards down, or it opens up more possibilities. And then when you win, it goes back to the empty spaces, right? Because all the cards have been sorted essentially. Yeah.
I'm so bored. I hate card games. Now tell me about the snap, because that snap sound, and Darryl teased me and told me he'd explain it later, like I had no possible idea of what it could be, and I have no possible idea how you created that snap sound on the instrument.
This was a really fun thing to do in the studio, because every time Karen and I have done this in a live performance, we test the hall exactly the way we did in the studio. We thought, okay, these have to sound different from each other. There has to be 2 distinct percussive sounds. And we want to make sure that it adds like a small element of theater to the piece. And so in the studio, it was just so fun. So everyone put their headphones on, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to try this part of the piano, and now I'll try the bench, and now I'll try, and now I'll try my leg. And we just kind of played around until we found the sounds that we liked. Right, Karen? It's great. And they had to be distinct enough that they represented 2 different things that in the score they represent. And then we just went with it, and I just modified kind of my bodily choreography, if you will, while playing it. Those are the 2 locations that these things are happening, and away we went.
And by the way,
so did you? I'm trying to think, Darryl. Did you clap one, or were they both?
Thank you, because Darryl has explained the whole thing except how it happened. Go.
Yeah. So one of them is a clap.
Oh, really? Fascinating.
I have a pretty sharp clap, so I had to be very careful not to overclap.
It's those fingers. It's those muscular fingers. Yeah.
Yeah. Then the other one is a slap, and so we tried a knock and a slap on various surfaces of the piano. And I feel like we eventually decided that the top of the fallboard was where it was the most successful.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So I knocked the top of the fallboard for that one and clapped for the other ones. And that's how we did it.
Well, bravo, or bravi tutti for that one. Yeah. And as I say, lots of wonderful sound effects that are never overdue. There's no artifice in any of the stuff that Karen uses. Any of the effects that you come up with are like for example, the girls, all that sound structure, sound story. It's all very purposeful and makes perfect sense, and it is again a little bit of a tongue-in-cheeky thing. It's wonderful. Thank you for describing that snap. I just could not figure out, because it sounded exactly like the instrument, the percussion instrument, whatever it's called. I'm just a conductor, I should know. It had that sound just precisely. Let's see, anything else? And then I asked myself, but does this in any way explain solitaire musically? Now, this was a couple hours ago. And I mentioned that at 18 minutes, it's a bit of a stretch for me, because I loathe card games. And it's still darkish, and this middle section and all that. And I finally conclude that I don't understand the piece. I think that's exactly what this one didn't work for me at that time, even a couple of hours ago. But now we've sorted out. Once I figured out that this was imagery, as you said, Darryl, theater, which is so wonderful when you can have that.
So going to say, I find this one, Karen, how many times did you perform this one live? Only a couple, I think.
Only
once or twice.
Yeah, once or twice.
But what I loved about, so I was raving about it as I was preparing it. I loved the process so much. I know that it sounds nothing like Bach, but it's incredibly contrapuntal because of how the different suits work all the way. And a ton of it is written, maybe all of it is written on 3 staves rather than 2. And so just figuring out how to fit all of the layers together is exactly what you're doing in solitaire. You're trying to figure out how to layer things in different spaces to finish the game and organize the cards. So when I was putting the score together, I geeked out over the entire time because I thought this is so fantastic because it's the clarity of Bach. It's the clarity of Bach counterpoint with how suit is represented by a very, very clear motive. Like subjects.
That didn't enter my head. Now thank you.
Yeah.
I'm much clearer. The idea of the suits of cards and the motives associated with them, that didn't even, because I hate card games. Okay, go ahead. So.
And then it became very, very similar to working through a Bach fugue where you're going to say, okay, how am I going to voice each of these different subjects and with which finger and which hand can I actually reach these different notes? And it became, a puzzle because Karen loves puzzles and I love puzzles too.
You two are meant for each other. I can see. Okay.
It was an enormous joy to work on. It really was. And it is a stretch for a listener, but it's a piece of musical theater in some ways. And I love it to bits. So
so therefore I stand duly slapped.
Well, I'm not trying to convert you to card games or anything, Daniel, but I really, really love it.
But it does make the piece so much more interesting, and I'm so glad it's 18 minutes instead of 30. We had that talk off film, and I don't mean to sound like it went nowhere for me. It's just that this is aside from the theater and everything else, it's a tricky one to as a listener to figure out and understand, especially if you loathe card games as I do. Yeah. So.
It's because you're getting each card is kind of individual, right? So when you have one note that's displaced from its place in the melody, right?
Yeah.
So you have a note from hearts going to a note from clubs, going to a note from diamonds, going to a note from spades or something like that. It's totally disjunct. Right. And so when you're playing solitaire, you're and then you get stuck. And so then in the piano it gets stuck. So it's really a lot of stopping and starting. And I do when you do really listen to it, you start to hear that there's more and more more and more of the motives are coming together.
That's right.
So it starts to be longer and longer, but it is very, especially at the beginning, it's because there's a high melody and a really low melody and then 2 medium. I say, in terms of their pitches, right? So they're in all extremes of the piano. So especially at the beginning, Darryl has to be up here and then down there and then in the middle and then loud and then very quiet and then he's having to jump around all the time.
And by the way, that whole, and I have the quote here about the 5 unique melodic ideas, but I didn't make any connection to the various suits of cards. Now that makes a whole lot more sense. And they have, and each of those melodic ideas have to be in a certain placement to identify them, hearts or mid-range, whatever. See what I mean? That makes it so much more fascinating, but such an incredibly esoteric intellectual exercise. I just don't know what got into you. What is the meaning?
I mean, I worked on that piece for 10 years.
I remember reading that now. Yeah, well, little wonder. Okay, well, so it's done.
It's done. I rewrote it. I think I rewrote it 2 or 3 times. So, anyways, just to try different things because I didn't like it.
And the obsession. So, there is an obsession thing you've got.
And there's an obsession. Yeah. I mean, and in the end, I actually on my first sabbatical, which was when we were first starting talking about writing the CD, I was I got to finish the Spider Solitaire piece for the CD. So that was. So I knew I had to do that for this.
Under pressure.
For this album. Yeah, but then it's still, that's when I got to 30 minutes and actually in the piece, which people won't know, is that I actually don't finish the solitaire game because it would have taken 30 minutes to finish the solitaire game. So once I think it's either the hearts melody. Anyways, I finally get 1 suit from ace to king or whatever it was. Yeah, because I go ace to king. So I get 1 from ace to king and then I just mush them all together. And then it ends. So I don't always
That's
know
good.
that
That's
it's
a
very
good way
strong
when you
ending,
get in
but
trouble. That's a good way to get
yeah.
out of it. Just mush them all together and get out of it. Well,
And then
so
get out of it.
the
Yeah.
piece is entirely over my head because I don't know the game of solitaire. That I mean, clearly that's for sure. And you have helped a great deal to make the piece a little clearer to me as a non-card playing person, let alone a crossword puzzle person. I hate both activities, so. So I hope I haven't gotten me in too much trouble, but it is. I think what the piece. Watch me get out of this one. I think I'm rehearsing this about 3.5 seconds ahead of myself. So solitaire actually does speak to your intellect, your whole way of thinking. Mine is all very. I'm a conductor, right? Mine's great. Romantic hills and dales and castles and and all that kind of picture music. Yours, and this is of course with composers anyway, I suppose, really, yeah. But yours is quite more. What do you call them? Not to say mathematical, but extremely structured. Your thinking, your love of solitaire and other games. It's just that difference in our chemical construction, I guess. How some of us come out one way and others. Fascinating. We got to end it because I'm right at I'm a little over an hour, and here we go. I got to get up to the top here again. Okay, so now let me try and summarize. Later, I will be so embarrassed that I made so many rude remarks, and it's too late. I told you I don't edit. So, what a charming chat with our Canadian colleagues, if I may say so, composer Karen Sunabacka and pianist Darryl Friesen. This is your first CD together. Wonderful. Just the execution is superb. Darryl in particular, and the structures are now much clearer. So thank you, Karen, for that. 2022 Ravello CD release, Curlicue. The solo piano works of Karen Sunabacka, and all of this information, how to get the CD. I guess it's a limited number. We'll talk later when I put the page together, but all that good information will be up at performingartsreview.net, so people can go and have a listen. But I think the bottom line for me is new music, and new music to my experience as an American. And we both know that we're only a border apart, but Canadian repertoire has come really quite a lot. I hope I'm not the only one that says this, but is reasonably unknown to Americans because we're so involved in our own navels. What can I say? It's the American way. I'm waiting for thunder strikes and shotguns from out in the street. Wonderful CD. These are the pieces, just to refresh everybody's memory. Piano, solo piano, all of it is solo piano with special effects and some electronic music, but Curlicue, hiding, our inner lives were entwined, embroidered with the same pattern. Wow, does that make so much more sense to me now, that after we've had this chat. Falling in the water, a canoe on a lake, falling water, and lost, and then spider solitaire. I don't dare ask where the word spider comes into that. We'll go off for another hour on how to play the game.
Yeah.
Is there something called spider solitaire?
It's a type of solitaire game. Yeah. There's so many different solitaire games. There's like hundreds of them. So this is a very particular one. Yeah.
So anyway, to all of my folks out there that are paying attention to this interview and when the review goes up and so on, that's the beauty. I have just discovered a whole new gaggle of piano pieces, wonderfully composed, beautifully put together, very intelligent, and so on. And so I hope my primarily American faculty members will have a look at this repertoire and go out and purchase a couple of these wonderful pieces. So thank you very, very much indeed for letting me have an opportunity to interview. It's cleared up a whole lot of things, and some will always be the same. You know what they are, about how I feel about certain things. So we're done. Any last remarks? What have I forgotten to mention? Should I mention anything? Come on now.
Oh, I don't know, but thank you for doing this interview. It's really
absolutely
fun to have this chat. Yeah.
Okay. And so, for some reason, Skype worked beautifully. We seem to have a not too interrupted sort of conversation. So great. Again, I want to thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity to just discover new repertoire and also to have a chat with you. So, thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
See you.